Good afternoon and welcome to the first session after the lunch. We're going to be talking about breaking the barriers to NextGen, equipage, environment, and funding. So one of the most important things that I have learned in my RTCA career is airline scheduling, and it is absolutely critical. It drives so much. It also drives occasionally panels and people's needs to be in different places. So I am going to just say that in advance, that we need to make sure that we get Chuck Stewart off at 3. So he'll be leaving 5 minutes early to make sure that we are not creating any kind of a problem in his life with his schedules. So with that, Melissa Rudinger is going to moderate the panel. Melissa has been at the forefront of the work that the RTCA has been involved in NextGen. She's the co-chair of the NAC subcommittee and a great moderator. So thank you, Melissa.
Great, thanks, Andy. So I was going to do abbreviated introductions. I'm going to do really abbreviated introductions since we're running late, and I would encourage you to look in the book to get the full bios because it's a really impressive panel. So we have Craig Drew to my left. He's the Senior Vice President of Airway Operations for Southwest Airlines. He's an ATP, had been an FAA designated flight inspector in the past, and is also my co-chair on the NAC subcommittee. Next to Craig is Captain Chuck Stewart. He's currently Chief Technical Pilot Communications at United, and he served 21 years in the Air Force, rounding out a career as the commander of an A-10 and F-16 flight test squadron. Chuck is chair of the SC 2014 and industry co-chair of the Datacom NIWIG. Next to Chuck, we have Pamela Whitley. Pamela is the acting assistant administrator for NextGen. She has been involved with NextGen literally since its conception and began her FAA career in 1993. She is an electrical engineer and worked in the past as an engineering consultant. We have Captain Brian Townsend. I think everybody knows the captain. He's been around a while. He's a principal tech pilot for American Airlines. And I didn't mean that as a negative, Brian. For American Airlines, and he leads the their NextGen initiatives. He's been a pro pilot for 36 years, most of that time in transport, but 7 years as a GA pilot. He's had many leadership roles at RTCA, most recently as co-chair of the Pbn Blueprint, the Community Outreach Task Force, and the Pbn NIWIG. And rounding out our panel, we have Nancy Young. She's Vice President of Environmental Affairs at American Airlines. She's also an environmental attorney and directs A4A's environmental sustainability programs, and has also been involved at ICAO to address environmental issues. Prior to American Airlines, she was a principal partner at the law firm of Beveridge and Diamond. So I think we have a very, very distinguished panel. We're going to be covering 3 topics. The title's Breaking Barriers, but we're going to focus specifically on equipage, environment, and funding. Those are 3 key areas. We want to have a discussion between the panelists. So I have some guided questions, but I want my panelists to interact. If somebody says something that sparks us to go down a different road or a different discussion, feel free to shout out, and we'll have hopefully a guided, robust dialogue on those 3 areas. And we are specifically going to be focusing on how we make improvements, significant improvements, to the air traffic system, and more importantly, how do we manage the risks in a manner that allows us to successfully implement NextGen. So with all that being said, I think I'm going to start out with Pamela with the first question. And this question relates to trajectory-based operations, or TBO. And I'm going to ask you, what do you think the most significant barriers are to successful implementation of TBO, or is there anything that's impeding the vision that you have for TBO?
So I think we have a very good vision. I think the work that we've been doing over the last several years, working with industry, has really gotten us to the place where we can move beyond individual systems and really looking at the operation in an integrated fashion. So I'll start by saying I think we're on the path to TBO, and we're having very I think, engaged dialogue on what we expect to see, managing expectations, and really painting a picture. Your question was about challenges. So I think the challenges moving forward kind of start with a tighter public-private partnership. We have government responsibilities. There's a set of expectations in industry, and I think to get to the vision or to realize the vision, we're gonna have to understand what the specific risks are and what the challenges are on our path. What are our hurdles? And how do we begin to address them together? And I think the title for this panel starts that conversation. Funding, we've talked about for years. I think the funding challenge isn't as big as it used to be, but still the concept of some multi-year commitment I think is on the table for discussion. The industry engagement, where we talk about the environment and what we see from the community perspective when we start to make these changes. And lastly, the equipage levels. So to get to the benefits, we really need to address the mixed equipage environment so that we can get to the benefits that we're looking for.
Thank you. So I think tying into that, I think I have a question for both Chuck and Brian. And it has to do with equipage.
Excuse me.
Glad it was you and not me.
Okay, it's my notes for this thing. I'm sorry.
Do you need to get that, Chuck?
Yes, I can.
So just generally equipage, you know, we've got a datacom program that's been pointed to as a success for NextGen, and that it's, at least there's a lot of us in the industry that think it's on a very successful track at the moment. And what are the primary barriers that had to be overcome to get that program down the road? And you know, what's next? How does the equipage affect the overall benefit? So it's kind of a rambling question, but either Chuck or Brian, if you want to talk about the mixed equipage environment and how we leverage the most benefit considering what the current equipage today and maybe what some of those barriers are.
Go ahead, Brian.
Well, Chuck, you must have received the datacom clearance for the early push, so go ahead and lead it off.
Yeah, it's been a stupendous program. It's been very successful. It's been one of those shining lights in the NextGen program. And a lot of it has been accomplished through a lot of very good collaboration. We have the FAA, the operators, NATCA, we've got the OEMs, we've got ECAM software developers, all in one room. But as far as the equipage is concerned, we have done this using my favorite way to fund and equip aircraft, and that's free money. As most of you know, there was an $80 million incentive program. There's some advantages and disadvantages to all that. The primary disadvantages, the FAA has to go out and get the money, and that's often very difficult. And probably one of the bigger ones here is, in this case, a lot of the regional airlines were not included. And so we've got kind of a self-inflicted mixed equipage out there that we're going to have to overcome. That is part of our NIWIG plan, is to go out and try to rectify that, but it's going to be a very difficult thing to do. The advantages to this, besides the free money, it makes the synchronization of equipage and the FAA infrastructure build-out sync up much better. And so you're able to get the benefits on a much faster timeline. We equipped, the FAA built out, and all of a sudden everybody was there and we were all using it, and everybody was quite pleased with it. The other good thing about it is not everybody took that $80 million or a portion of that $80 million. They saw the airlines that did. They saw all of a sudden this equipage timeline, and all of a sudden, people became awfully interested in this. And so a lot of airlines went out on their own and actually started equipping on their own, which was very useful. And so we have more and more aircraft out there who are going to be able to participate. And probably the last thing, the advantage is we saw the benefits come in very quickly. And sure enough, all of a sudden, at least at United Airlines, it might be the same in American and Southwest, in other words, is every airplane that we get now has fans on board. We don't buy an airplane unless it has fans and VDL Mode 2 radio. And so everything we've got coming out of the off the factory now is going to be able to participate in Datacom, which is really good. Now, as far as the benefits are concerned, those are a little bit tougher. We've seen it in DCL. We've had reduced taxi times and things like that, and we're quite pleased with the way that's going. With domestic en route services, we're not sure yet. Because we're rolling this out, the capability kind of slowly in an evolutionary way, and that's fine. I fully approve of that because we're doing some great things, baby steps, and we're going to finally get there. But the big benefits as we do this are going to come 15 years from now and stuff, as we truly start integrating with PBN, TBO, and doing tailored arrivals and things like that, where you really need a datacom. That's where we're going to really see it, and that's where I really expect to see some really good benefit out of the program. Your turn.
All right. Having the incentive programs is wonderful when we can do it. It definitely motivates people to participate and helps us to advance much quicker. We, not only along with the Datacom program, but our initial ADS-BN project with our A330 fleet, that was funding provided by the FAA. It made it a very good partnership. But when we look at PBN, for example, and many aircraft had been equipped with flight management systems for a number of years, but we had not been fully utilizing that capability with PBN. We've gone through that evolution. Initially, there was probably 20% of the aircraft in the system that still had to rely on the legacy systems. Some places it was even a higher percentage. Now we have essentially 99% equipage for those procedures. We're in the next phase with RNP, for example, and I think that's a bigger challenge for us with mixed equipage. Mixed equipage will not go away overnight. I think we're always going to have to deal with it in one aspect or another. And even if we could bring everyone up to the same level playing field, I'm not sure how achievable that would really be with the manufacturers, the lifespans of the aircraft that are already out there in the system. So we really need to more effectively figure out how do we leverage existing procedures, whether it's leg coding types, different types of RNAV procedures that are in the system, and make sure that they are providing the full benefits that we can achieve with it, and still make those incremental steps along the way. And I know that's not a popular conversation with some, but we all have to collectively work together and try to figure that out. Otherwise, we'll just sit here and spin our wheels.
Thanks. It's interesting. I think the mixed equipage question is an important one because in an ideal world, we'd all be equipped, but I think you put it well, we don't live in an ideal world. Did you want to?
If I could just jump in here real quickly. First of all, Southwest Airlines, I believe that with Datacom, we've been able to save on average 53 seconds per flight with Datacom. Those numbers, I know Rick's probably got them in the back there, but that equates to about 2.5 airplanes for us, and so it is paying back big dividends for us. And like these gentlemen have said, in the future, we're going to have a lot of paybacks that'll really be worthwhile. I think Datacom has been a wonderful program. It's been highly successful. Mr. Winches and his group have been great to work with, and I think I see nothing but success in the next decade or so ahead. Back to mixed equipage. As you know, Southwest Airlines jumped onto the NextGen bandwagon very early in the game. I think it was in 2003 that the FAA decided we were going to do it. And in 2006, there was a major paper come out, and we decided in 2007 that we were going to equip, and we spent about $175 million. When we retired our 300s last year, 737 Classic 300s last year, we're now 100% equipped, and we see great benefits when we get to use it. I think that as I look at the other carriers in mixed equipage, the number I've heard is that the FAA would like to see 85% equipped before we're going to use it all the time. My point would be at 51%, we should be using it all the time. We're placating the lowest common denominator, I guess, be the way to put it. And I'd like to see a lot more action there. There was a Senator Bob Murphy, he's long since passed on. He was from East Texas, from Nacogdoches, Texas. By the way, that's 50 yards east of the resumed speed sign. And he gave a talk years and years ago in the 70s, and he was a funny guy. And he said, I walked into the coffee shop there in Nacogdoches, and I ordered a cup of coffee. And Flo came over, and she poured me a cup of coffee and walked away, and I looked down, and the cup was only half full. And I said, hey, Flo, you only gave me half a cup. And she said, stir what you got. And I think sometimes when it comes to PBN, we have to stir what we've got. The coffee's fine, there's just not enough of it. And I would hope that, as we go forward, that we become a lot more serious about this. I'm happy to say that the Northeast Corridor work has been wonderful in the last year and a half, and I really think that the groups come together and they've done a bang-up job of coming together and getting this work done. So more of that would be good.
So I think the Northeast Corridor is a really good segue. I wanted to bring Nancy into the discussion. I think one of the big barriers or long poles in the tent really is environmental. In addition to all the capacity constraints that we talk about with the Northeast, there's also a very fundamental environmental issue. And so I wanted to ask Nancy, in order for NextGen and particularly PBN to succeed and for us to get the benefits of the flight paths, what do you think needs to be altered either with the process, or what are we doing, or what are we not doing in order to make PBN implementation smoother, more successful, so we're not having to go back and revisit communities where we've already implemented?
Yeah, I think Paul Rinaldi, when they were talking about the Northeast Corridor, kind of hit the word, it's noise, and that's the challenge. Addressing the fact that we have a tremendous record on noise reduction in this industry that continues. We've reduced noise 94% since the late 70s, while increasing enplanements more than 325%, for example. And if you look 2000 to 2016, you also see tremendous noise reduction in 2016 relative to 2000, while 22% increased enplanement. So you've got an objective noise story to tell, but as you know, as we roll out different procedures, we're moving the noise, and in some cases, in many cases, concentrating the noise. So while a lot fewer people can be exposed sometimes when we do that, in fact, you can look objectively at the numbers and say, overall, your noise environment is improving, it is worse for those people who are having it over and over their house with precise flights, or they didn't have it before and we've changed the flight path. So the problem is I think become really, really obvious to us, and I give a lot of credit to the NextGen Advisory Committee and the group that Brian and Jim Kreitz led up, and the Pbn Blueprint stuff, because they recognized that early and said, we really need to do a better job up front of having the community understand what may be going to happen. So we identified that, back 2015, in fact, and we're really focused on that. The challenge, I think, is executing. So we had 2 different PBN sets of blueprint recommendations about community engagement building on each other. And they've got a lot of really good stuff in them. And I was on one of those panels and did a lot of work on it. The challenge is taking all those pieces and executing, and I'm going to make kind of a couple of points here. One, and Melissa, you hit on it, we have a past and we have the present. So first you've got to think about the fact that we implemented some procedures, may or may not have done the best community engagement. I think that's debatable. But we have this legacy issue about some of those sites where we may or may not have done the best job on community engagement, and that raises a lot of procedure questions. Then you have the current situation. FAA and the airlines and the airports are working together to implement better community outreach to let local officials in particular and the community kind of know what to expect. To do that, you have to sell NextGen and the fact that this is a huge infrastructure improvement. It's fundamental to, you know, mom and apple pie in the United States to get this infrastructure improvement done. You got to get out in the communities and do that. It's not a negotiation, though. You have to get out and let them know what's going to happen, but you have to make a decision. FAA has to go forward. So what's in those Pbn Blueprint recommendations is really a how-to on community engagement going forward. Then what you raised, some of the sites that we have, whether it's Phoenix, whether it's NorCal, whether it's Charlotte would be a good example. Charlotte, there was a lot of community engagement. They didn't necessarily show up. A full environmental assessment was done, several community meetings, and now the community's pissed off because they have noise and it's changed. So even when you do community engagement, you're going to have opposition. And from Airlines for America view, we can't take a step back. We can't say all those sites we're going to redo. We really we need to move forward, and the recommendations also kind of speak to that, to going back and making sure that you follow up. So it is a challenge to bring the objective reality out there, to get local officials convinced of the overall good in their area, and we have objective environmental data on that, and then lay it out like it is, and you got to make a decision and go forward.
Before we get off the environment, I'd like to just go one step further in the environmental, because you mentioned an important point about how we've done it here in the past and how we're doing it now and in the future. Is the attitude different? I know you work on some international committees. Is the attitude different globally? Is there a different mindset when it comes to modernizing and route structures, or do they face similar issues that we do here in the U.S.?
Well, I mean, I think we're pretty well aware of this issue, that sort of it is very much a first world problem for people to be privileged enough to complain about aircraft noise. And so what we're seeing very similar kinds of responses in Europe, even Australia and some other places, to the modernization efforts there, or the changes in procedures. As you might expect, a number of parts of the world that have less service, and they're doing tremendous things. Brazil would be an example. China would be another example. They certainly, you can talk about their political regimes, but they certainly are not having that kind of public outcry, because people want the service and respect that. But there continues to be a lot of work on the international level, whether it's on climate change. You know, we just implemented the latest aircraft noise standard in the United States, the Chapter 5, well, Stage 5 in the United States, the Stage 5 noise standard. So the continuing work on the international level for standards for the aircraft, but also on the standardization panel earlier, people talked about ICAO standards and aviation system block upgrades and other things to bring commonality around the world. I think those are important concepts.
Great, thank you. So I want to switch gears, and I'm going to come back to you, Pam. A subject near and dear to general aviation operators' hearts is ADS-B and the mandate. So I'm just curious what the FAA data indicates on ADS-B equipage to meet the January 2020 mandate, and what are the primary issues that need to be addressed, or perhaps we could call them risks?
So right now, the data is showing both on the commercial side and on GA that they're about 1/3 equipped. And we've gone through a process over the last 6 months collecting data. Originally, our insight was coming from the aircraft that we could see flying in the system that actually had transponders. The acting administrator, Dan Elwell, actually reached out to each individual airline. And what we asked for through the NAC process was information on their plans. So we now have the data on who's actually equipped today and their plans on being equipped by 2020. And you know, we're seeing that most of the airlines have a plan. They're in the process of equipping their aircraft based on the plans that they presented. I think from a GA perspective, we are a little less confident because we're not really sure how many GA aircraft will actually require equipage based on where they fly. So I think going forward, the conversation is really to maintain that data. And we're doing that now internally on a monthly basis and sharing that through the NAC forum. We basically are appreciative to all of the airlines for sharing information because that was a ask, and part of it is to help us plan for the environment after the mandate. So we now have better insight into everybody's plans, and I think we'll continue to watch that because I think that will tell us a lot about, okay, will we have a challenge for the operation post-mandate, and I think I owe Terry that visibility as she plans for the operation post the 2020 mandate.
Great. I think I want to ask each of my operators, and we can maybe start with you, Chuck. What's your view on ADS-B Equipage, and what have we learned from the program so far that we might leverage to take even more advantage of the technology?
Well, first of all, at Southwest Airlines, we're going to be on target January 1st, 2020, and we are working on the wiring process of it right now. So we have a couple of hundred sitting in a warehouse in Phoenix and Honeywell. Well, there's no sense in bringing them online if we don't need them yet. And so we are working on this, and we have a plan in place, and it's on schedule, it's on time. I like to say it's within budget, but of course, this is a huge capital expenditure. I think some of the challenges as operators we have is we were promised some things with it, and we're not seeing those come to fruition. Less spacing, as an example. And I think the FAA came out in March of this year and said that wasn't going to happen. And then, of course, ground-based radar. That's going to stay. And so if you look at all these other countries around the world, they're going to satellite-based, et cetera. And I think that that's a bit of a challenge for us because we would like to see more of that. I think oceanic and things like that, it should be wonderful. But there are some challenges with it.
Any perspectives you want to share from your airline's perspective?
Yeah, we're the same thing as Southwest. Even though it's probably a third on your records, we've got a whole bunch of aircraft that we've done the wiring already to the airplane. They're just all we have to do is connect the ADS-B up to it. So we're well on track to do that also. I share Craig's a little bit of frustration with its benefits. There's not much benefit to the airline, period. Except, and then there's two big excepts to this. We're looking really forward to space-based ADS-B in the remote areas, which you are not quite as involved in as we are.
West Texas.
Yeah. And so we think that is going to be a big plus, especially to help with the reduced separation in some of the tracks in the remote areas. And the other thing is we're really looking forward to, and we're not too sure when all the applications are going to be there, is ADS-B in. It's not only a great situational awareness tool, but it will provide the basis for reduced separation, for interval management and things like that. And that's where we see the big benefit. But this first 2020 mandate, we're doing it. It's going to be great. But continental U.S.-wise, it doesn't have that much benefit for us.
How about you, Brian? Do you share that sentiment, or do you have a different point of view?
Similarities, but we are on par for the mandate, and that obviously is being worked. But I mentioned our A330 program when we first embarked on ADS-B in some years back, and I guess to some extent that was probably a bit premature, primarily because we weren't dealing in an ADS-B out environment. And to conduct some of the ADS-B in operations, you need a target-rich environment for that to happen. And that was one of the detriments of the program. However, there was some information garnered out of that with the operations. And more recently, we had the opportunity to embark on a completely new game-changing retrofit for our aircraft with ADS-B in, and the company has made the commitment to equip the entire A321 fleet. So that's currently, will be over 300 aircraft to start with. And so not to conduct this as just a demonstration, but actually have some bona fide ADS-BN operations. It's a huge commitment on the airline's part, but between the change in that equipage architecture, what we learned from our initial program, and where we think we can go with this one, it could be a game changer for the NAS. Some of the operational benefits that we believe we can see out of this, Chuck had mentioned interval management. That's a big one. In our view, that gets us a step closer to a time-based NAS, and this is from a flight deck point of view, which we see some advantages to that. And also with the cockpit display of traffic that increases situational awareness and initially will aid us with visual approaches, increasing runway utilization and operations. We believe that we can gain some efficiency and capacity with these tools. So probably even to me more important out of all this is as this program continues to evolve, we'll have to make certain that these tools work for the controllers. If it doesn't decrease their workload and increase efficiencies for them, it will more than likely fail. So we are working very closely with NATCA as we roll out this program, make sure that they're fully engaged, and as we begin these operations, we'll be listening very closely to them to make sure that it works. We're already getting phenomenal feedback from our safety representatives within the union. They see the safety benefits, obviously, to the increased situational awareness. And not only that, but we're encouraging other airlines to show some interest in this, and we'll be sharing information as we go along. In this particular case, the more the merrier. If we can get more on board with this, we think it can really change operations in the NAS even sooner.
So Melissa, I'd just like to kind of add to that. The mandate has been out there for 8 years. And it's a little bit like when you build a house and you show up and one day the trees are cut, then you see a slab. So we're at the beginning of a very long process. And I think the ADS-B out mandate was a mandate because it was just the start of a big thing. And I agree with everybody here. There's some really beneficial capabilities that we're working together to mature. And I think the first step is just kind of getting that ADS-B out capability so we can build on that with some very powerful ADS-B in type capabilities. So I think it's a big first step, and I think it's a big step for the industry because it is, I think, the first example that we have to show the naysayers that government and industry can meet milestones together.
Yeah, that was Dedico.
Well, we paid for that one. That was a little different.
You can pay for more if you like.
Yeah, we paid for that one. It wasn't as powerful a step.
If I could just jump in real quickly and say something on that. One of the challenges we have right now, and I think it was you, Pamela, who said this a couple of months ago in one of the meetings, is we're finished with all of the low-hanging fruit. The easy stuff is done.
Yes.
And for the next few years, the difficult work is ahead of us. And I would hope that we continue to do things like this. Thank you, Margaret and RTCA. Thank you for the NAC and the DAC and all those other programs that bring us together on a regular basis. And we support the teams like the NIWIG. And those ladies and gentlemen who work on those teams do a wonderful job. And we need to continue to support that because I think that's where most of the work is getting done for this.
I agree. So I know, Melissa, earlier we talked a little bit about Northeast Corridor, but I do think we should recognize that that is a huge step for the industry because we've spent several years just making sure we were selecting the right tools, the programs were moving at a pace that both government and industry could understand. We had detailed discussions about programs like Datacom, Wake Recat, even looking at where we wanted to put procedures. But Northeast Corridor represents a huge initiative to integrate all of those things together in a very complex airspace in our country. And it's a big step, one, for us to stand together and say, okay, we want to take this on, because many people have tried to take on Northeast Corridor in different lights over the last 20 years. But I think this is a very powerful move for government and industry to say, we're going to look at this entire region of the country, and we're going to look at all of the tools that we have available to us and really work on making this part of our airspace more efficient. And everybody that knows aviation knows that once you fix New York, the rest of the country is easy. So I think we have to recognize that we've taken on something very difficult, and we've taken it on together.
I think that's an important point. I think we've got a few minutes left, and I'd like to hear, based on what you just said about the Northeast Corridor, which I think the industry, everybody recognizes that is the linchpin to maybe modernizing the system and gaining efficiencies. So I'd like to ask each of my panelists in succession what you think the biggest barrier is to success in the Northeast Corridor, or what the most significant risk is, if you'd rather talk about risk. And I'd like to start and just go down the line.
I would say equipage. Unless we can fix that, we are going to have challenges in the Northeast. And I forget who mentioned it earlier. I think it was Warren with JetBlue this morning, who said that over 50% of our delays always originate in the Northeast. And as you know, we drag everything from east into the west every single day. And I think that with equipage, we have got to figure out a way. Can we, if over 60% of our fleets are equipped with RMP1 and RF legs, why can't we utilize that? I know our network planning departments won't like that, but we can reflow aircraft in there, and I really think that we could utilize it and really set up a true next-gen organization within the NEC.
Chuck?
Yeah, I agree with Craig about the equipage. The other thing is that we need to do is to make sure we have a good long-term vision of what it looks like. I'm not convinced we're there yet. We're doing things like with RF, and we occasionally bring in Datacom and stuff like that. But I think we need to get what do we want that airspace to look like? How do we get the capacity? Just a clean sheet of paper. And then start building with a completely integrated, non-stovepipe CNS program to go do that. You're going to have Pbn, you're going to have Datacom to support all that, and then of course the surveillance with things like ADS-BN. And once you get all those things, I mean, those are the basic building blocks. But now we figure out where we got to go. We can't get there in 2 years. I know that. But we can, if we have that vision, we can start taking little bits at it at a time. So my greatest risk, I think, is we may take these little bits of little bites, of a capability, but they're not going to build into what we really want.
I agree. I think I would articulate it this way. It's operational integration. We know the list of tools, we know the list of capabilities, we have a good idea of what the perfect aircraft looks like, we know what the real world looks like, we know how a tower operates today, we know how a TRACON operates today, we know how our center operates today, we know how airline operations works today. Now, how do we integrate all of those things to a future vision and make sure all of those things are lined up? So at some day, some people say 2025, some people say 2030, we have an operation that looks very different, and it really is being managed with time as a key component and providing the predictability, the flexibility, and the operational efficiency we're looking for. So it's really pulling all those pieces together.
Pam makes good points, and this morning I was thinking about Paul Rinaldi's comments and how true that is throughout the NAS. In generally good weather conditions, the controllers and the pilots do a phenomenal job of keeping those runways loaded because we rely so much on visual clearances. And once those conditions change, and not necessarily full IMC conditions, those rates can go down, and that does contribute to the problem. So along with that thought, to me, one of our biggest barriers is possibly how focused our vision is on this. When we talk about equipage, let's make certain exactly what we're talking about and what benefits will be provided. If we all equipped equally and the infrastructure is not in place for the decision support tools and I'm not saying that are just deployed, but are actually working the way they're supposed to and providing the necessary tools for the controllers, we'll still be in the same situation that we're in today. So I just want to emphasize that we continue to collaborate together, make sure that the data we're using is correct, the metrics for determining those benefits, and as I think as Pam said too, make sure all those pieces are lined up and working as a suite of tools, if you will.
Yeah, and I'll say the predictable and the unpredictable thing that you would think I would say, which is one, I'm going to come back to the environmental issue. I mean, you have among the most engaged communities in that corridor, all up and down that corridor, and a number of Quiet Skies coalitions. You have a number of congressional folks very engaged on the issue and inclined to throw their weight in certain directions on the issue. So I think that that is going to be a huge challenge to realizing the benefits and the vision that could be realized out of this. So you expected that. The two things I would add that you might not have expected out of me are some disagreement perhaps with Paul Rinaldi's assessment earlier of staffing, and I completely agree with what Brian said and what Paul said about how great the controllers are and what a great job that they do. But we continue to see significant air traffic controller shortages in that corridor, and as Brian said, not only do you need to make it work for them in terms of the tools, but we also need to have full staffing in such a busy corridor. So hopefully what Paul said is right, that there's progress, but we're not seeing it at the level that he may have prophesized. The last thing I think being metrics that Brian also hit, very critical. I mean, our members, our board, very focused on the fact that we, despite all of our many years of working on metrics, we don't really have agreed metrics sometimes for success, number one. And also, we've degraded the time period to get to and from New York so much. Our expectations are probably a little too low. And it shouldn't just be that. We should be doing better, not just getting back to what we think might be even. And so I know at our board meeting last week, that was a big focus of their discussion. How can we contribute to fixing that?
So I think on that very powerful point.
I was just going to add one other thing. We need metrics that has not been massaged and is fully transparent. That's all I'm going to say.
On that equally powerful point, I think this has been a great discussion, and I really appreciate everybody's time, as well as the audience, in helping us make this a successful program. Thank you.
Thank you all. Thank you all very much. It was a great panel. I think we all know the devil's in the details here, and this is the group of people that are working through the details, and we hope you keep doing it. Thank you.